I'm Carl Gershman, the president of NED, and I want to welcome everyone here to this meeting on the problems and the growing problems in the Western Balkans. As some people came in this morning, Ivana was saying it was almost like a reunion for a lot of people that worked together on the problems in the Balkan region in the 1990s, and that seems like now a long time off. And there are other problems that are on the minds of people in Washington, in the Middle East, and in Ukraine, China, North Korea, and so forth. But this problem is coming back in a very, very dangerous way. And as we look over what has happened since the Dayton Peace Accords a little over 2 decades ago, there's obviously not been a solution. There's been relative stability, but no democratic solution, no real democratic consolidation. Political institutions remained weak and dominated by nationalist and populist strongmen, and societies remained very polarized, high levels of corruption, captured media, public frustration, and so forth. And there's also been the problem of malign foreign influence, especially coming, as we know, from Russia, to exploit the vulnerabilities in the region and to increase the risks for radicalization, and the risks not just to the immediate region of the Western Balkans, but also for Europe and for the whole transatlantic area. And so even though we're 2 decades from the Dayton Peace Accords, the rhetoric at both the political and the grassroots level is increasingly resembling that of the 1990s, the early 1990s. Just a few examples of how these problems are developing, and of course we'll have more of a chance to discuss this during the panel this morning. But in Bosnia, the president of Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, has challenged the very, very fragile constitutional order there, first by holding the court referendum on the sanctioned statehood day, and then by staging a kind of a lavish celebration on that holiday, which had been declared unconstitutional, and even going so far as to include in the ceremonies Serbian soldiers who had been integrated into a joint Bosnian military force, which was one of the successes in Bosnia. But the effort there is to undermine the integration in Bosnia, and it even appears that there's a kind of a preparation for an eventual attempt at the entity's secession with Russia's tacit and possibly even open support. And then there's been an escalation of not only a war of words and nationalist reinterpretations of history between Serbia and Croatia, but also even an arms race, which Russia has contributed to by providing Serbia with 6 MiG-29s, which they're now refurbishing. And at the EU-facilitated level, the normalization process of relations between Kosovo and Serbia was almost derailed recently when Serbian authorities sent a kind of a promotional Russian-made train adorned with the words "Kosovo is Serbia" in 21 languages, including in Albanian, to North Kosovo. The train was stopped, but even that was declared to be an act of war. And the episode is seen by many people as an escalation of a potential and possible potential contest between Russia and the West over the region. And our friend Janusz Bugajski, who is with the Center for European Policy Analysis, wrote recently in a policy brief for the new administration that a potential that there is this, if the United States is going to face a geopolitical test on its strategic periphery, it's most likely to come where American power is weak, not where it's strong. And recent efforts to shore up the Baltic states through US and NATO military deployments have increased America's relative strength in that region, but less secure, though no less important, is the geopolitical theater of the Western Balkans. And here, a combination of historical legacies, post-conflict vulnerabilities, Janusz writes, and Russian interference should focus the attention of the new US administration on an area of heightened strategic importance. But the kind of attention that needs to be devoted to this is not just as so in the past to preserve stability at any cost. It's necessary to try to move forward in raising the bar, not lowering it, for progress on democratic issues and establishment of democratic norms in the region, and to have conditionality for integration into NATO and the European Union, which has not been done. And the region, of course, is very vulnerable and to foreign influence. And the easiest targets for Russia in the region are corrupt politicians who remain only nominally committed to the democratic consolidation and membership in the EU, where they might be held accountable. And the West, it's essential that the West understand that the key to the long-term regional stability and security is true democratic progress in the region, and that the tools at its disposal, including NATO membership, have to be used to provide much-needed support in this process. I think that's one of the reasons why the meeting this morning is so important, because we want to express our solidarity for the people in the region who are defending these principles, and that's essentially civil society activists and independent journalists who remain steadfast to these principles, but they're alone. And frankly, they're actually being betrayed by and under attack by many of the populist governments in the region. They've practically been wiped out in certainly the media in Macedonia and Serbia, where a kind of open war has been waged on critical voices, and they similarly they're accused of plotting to destabilize their respective countries with the help of foreign assistance. And a number of our friends in the region and key organizations are being attacked, independent media in particular, but they remain committed to the vision of a peaceful, stable, and democratic region. Just last week, a group of activists gathered around the Youth Initiative for Human Rights were attacked at a ruling party event in Serbia when they protested the featured speaker, Veselin Slivakinin, who is a convicted war criminal. Not only did the police refuse to provide the Youth Initiative with adequate protection, but local and national government officials, including the Interior Minister, Nebojša Stefanović, went so far as to accuse the Youth Initiative of being responsible for the incident. And taking the lead from the political elites, the government-controlled media was quick to mount a smear campaign against one of the leaders of the Youth Initiative, Anita Mitic, who was a former Hereford Youth Fellow here at the NED. And they're trying to create a public atmosphere in which attacks on critical voices, from civic activists to journalists to opposition party leaders, are considered to be a measure of patriotism. And as was to be expected, the Youth Initiative was indeed attacked again, this time by a mob of 6 men who plastered the Youth Initiative's offices with messages of hate, labeling them traitors and foreign mercenaries. And it turned out that these attackers belonged to a nationalist, Russia-funded group that had fought in eastern Ukraine. So it's very, very dangerous. And, you know, rather than getting support, Western governments in the region have told the Youth Initiative to restrain themselves and not to be provocative because they're making things worse from the point of view of some of the Western embassies in the region. So the kind of support that we're trying to give by having a meeting like this morning is extremely important. I myself have participated in 3 of the youth summits organized by the Youth Initiative for Human Rights. I was there in October of 2015 in Sarajevo when they had a big youth summit. And you know, when I was there, I talked about the secessionist referendum that Dodik is organizing, which was a problem back then, and also talked about the danger of Russian interference and the need for nurturing and developing democracy and a real sense of citizenship. And I talked about some of the programs that the Youth Initiative had organized. When it was founded, it organized a visitors program to have exchanges between young people in Kosovo and Serbia, and that has spread to the entire region. Some 15,000 young people have been involved in that. Anita Mitic herself was a product of that visitors program, and they also have another program called Ordinary Heroes, which uses art to foster dialogue and reconciliation. I'm just absolutely delighted that we have with us this morning Andrei Nosov, who is the founder of the Youth Initiative in 2003, and really one of the most visionary young leaders in the region, and somebody told me over the weekend, but I wanted to welcome her because the Humanitarian Law Center has also been a close friend of the NED, and in 2000 we honored with our Democracy Award in the Congress Natasha Kandic and Veton Soroy with our Democracy Award. I'm now going to call upon Ivana to moderate the session, and I just want to say, I think as everybody knows, because Ivana is known to everyone who's active on these issues, that she's not only a leader and inspiration in this area, but frankly, she's a leader and inspiration within the NED more generally. Ivana.
Okay, let's see if this is on. Yes? Everybody can hear me? Thank you, Carl, so much for this very inspirational message, and particularly for this message of solidarity and support for the work of the Youth Initiative for Human Rights, our long-term grantee that is really facing some very difficult times these days. And I hope that here, as a community, we can send this message of support along the lines of what Carl just conveyed. Speaking of the community, I have to say that for all the years that I've been here at NED and covering the Southeast Europe, which has now been over a decade, it's been increasingly difficult to get attention to our region, and it's understandably so, considering what else is happening in the world. For this reason, I'm very inspired and truly happy this morning to see the turnout to this event and to see how interested, what a significant community that's still interested we have here in Washington. I would like to take this opportunity to also welcome our viewers online, because this event is being live streamed, and to invite them to participate in our conversation on Twitter by using hashtag NEDEvents, that's NED events. I will do my best later in the conversation, particularly during Q&A, to respond to any of their questions, if they choose to do so. I'm joined this morning, just to say my full name, Ivana Cvetković-Bajrović, Senior Program Officer here at the Endowment, and I'm joined here by a truly impressive group of analysts and practitioners, as Carl was saying earlier. Some voices you don't get to hear very often here in Washington, which is probably in part why there is such a great interest in hearing them this morning. I don't really know what else to say about Andrei after what Carl just did. I will just mention that He has a tie now, wearing a tie for the second day in a row, which is not a typical thing for an activist of his kind. But as Carl mentioned, the Reagan for Self Fellow here today. This event, by the way, is co-organized between the Europe program and the Forum, which we're very happy about and are thankful to our colleagues from the Forum for doing so. Andrei was also one of the young leaders named among the 30 under 30 on the occasion of Ned's 30th anniversary. And when he returns from his 5-month residence here in Washington, he will go back to his position as a director of Heart Effect Fund, which is a foundation that uses art, theater, and film to promote some of the most sensitive issues in the region, such as reconciliation, transitional justice, minority rights, and interethnic dialogue. Sitting to his left is Goran Miletić, who is the Western Balkans Program Director at the Civil Rights Defenders, formerly Swedish Helsinki Committee. As Carl mentioned, this is a leading human rights organization from Sweden in the Western Balkans. They're both a grant maker and an advocacy organization promoting the work of groups and media that work on rule of law, human rights, and freedom of expression. A great partner of Ned's, somebody that we really closely work with. And finally, Jasmin Mujanovic, currently policy consultant with Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Previously, Dr. Jasmin Mujanovic, I forgot to say, because he deserves that. He just earned the title last year and is currently working on his book, due to be published later this year. Hopefully, hopefully. I don't want to put him on the spot. Jasmin, as some of you may know if you're following him on Twitter, is somebody who follows the region very closely, is a media personality in his own right, and I'm sure that those of you who follow the region closely have seen quite a bit of him online and on television. So the way we will do this is, instead of having presentations, we envision this as a conversation of sorts. I will ask a few rounds of questions, and I suspect this will inspire a lot of you to ask questions. So at some point quite soon, within less than an hour, I will turn over to you. And I will begin right away with Jasmin, and referring back also to something that Carl mentioned, which is a brief that was recently published by Janusz Bugajski of the Center for European Policy Analysis, called Frontline Vulnerability, the Strategic Case for the Western Balkans. If you haven't seen this brief, I highly recommend it. It's very short, but makes some very excellent points, and that I might refer to a few more times later in the conversation. Right now, what I'm interested in is Janusz makes a case that there are two countries in the region that are potential hotspots and that give a reason for concern and deserve more attention. For him, those are Bosnia and Macedonia. I know that in your work for Freedom House, these are the countries that you also cover, but you also focus on a lot of other countries in the region. Do you share his concerns that these are the two countries? What are your two countries and why?
I actually do share his concern, and I do think Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Macedonia are sort of the critical cases. Even though they are, I think in general conversations about the Balkans and about Europe, they're sort of synonymous with being peripheral, right? But strategically and politically, I would argue that Bosnia in particular is central to our conception of the Western Balkans. And unfortunately, Macedonia is a country that is an exemplar of the kind of democratic retrenchment and the sort of broader illiberal and authoritarian turn in the region. Is it not on? It's on.
Says it's on.
Says it's on. Oh, no. Is it better now? Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay, so as I was saying, Bosnia and Macedonia, I do agree, are the two critical cases. Both are frequently thought of being as peripheral, but I think to our sort of broader political understanding of the region, they are central. Macedonia, because I think they are an exemplar of the illiberal and authoritarian turn that we've seen throughout the region. A few years back, Macedonia was sort of on the forefront of the EU accession processes in the region. And not only has it now fallen behind, but we've seen some incredibly alarming developments in that country over the past 2 or 3 years. We've, of course, had American and European mediators We've now had these elections that happened just a few weeks ago, and the new old government has already made it very clear that they're going to go very hard after civil society and NGOs, and that is something that we absolutely need to be worried about. And then, of course, in Bosnia, in particular, we have to be, as was mentioned right at the onset, I think the primary threat, unfortunately, continues to come from Banja Luka, from Mr. Dodik's government. We have seen some of the most clear and transparent direct attacks, not just on the Dayton Peace Accords, but what I would refer to as sort of the broader Dayton constitutional order, which is to say the rule of law in Bosnia. Mr. Dodik is not alone in this, but he's far and away the most pressing threat as it concerns democratization and democratic consolidation in Bosnia.
So you say Mr. Dodik is not alone in this. Can you elaborate on that a little bit so that we don't put the spot just on him?
Sure. I mean, look, we have this famous triumvirate in Bosnia, right? And we have, of course, on the Croat side, we have Mr. Dragan Čović of the HDZ, who is a very problematic figure. Continues to closely align himself with Mr. Dodik, but has also, kind of taken a pick and choose attitude as it comes to the rule of law and to the broader process of reform in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We're also currently seeing some fairly problematic occurrences vis-a-vis his relations in Zagreb, who are now advocating for this quote-unquote federalization of Bosnia-Herzegovina. I think all that needs to be said about that is that I think it's inappropriate for a neighboring state to advocate for constitutional changes in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The other, of course, key actor here is Mr. Bakir Izetbegović, who has also been a key obstacle to resolving a number of critical issues in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in particular the question of Mostar, the Sejdić-Finci question. But overall, when we talk about these three gentlemen, when we talk about their three parties, they act in concert. I would say they act in concert, notwithstanding some particular objectives that they have. Mr. Dodik has his stuff in the RS, Dragan Čović's fantasy of the third entity, Mr. Izetbegović about completely consolidating and turning into sort of a cohesive nationalist bloc, the so-called Bošnjak option. They act in concert to prevent substantive democratization in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I think they work in concert to keep at the margins not just reform-oriented political parties, but also civil society and all these actors in civil society who I think provide really critical voices as to their administration.
It's interesting, before I move on to the other speakers, just really quickly, you mentioned this idea of federalization. Janusz Bogajski in his paper also mentions that this might also be the direction in which the ethnic Albanians go in their demands, should their demands not be met in the process of government formation. What do you think of that, and what do you predict may happen? I mean,
look, this whole talk of federalization is not federalization as we understand it, of course, right? It's ethnic fragmentation. Right, and by ethnic fragmentation, we also have to be clear that what we're actually talking about in practice is usually one-party dictatorships, de facto. Right, so when you turn what used to be fairly vibrant and diverse regions, and you turn each individual town into now an ethnic enclave, a de facto Bantustan, of course you're going to have one-party rule or some kind of perverse managed democracy. So I'm very, very skeptical of this talk of federalization. What we need to talk about, not just in Bosnia and Macedonia, is about rationalization and democratization. There is absolutely no reason. Right? We know this even in Bosnia. We have individual towns like Brčko where multi-ethnic governance works perfectly. So why does it not work in Mostar if it works in Brčko? Right? So we have to understand that these are political games. Unfortunately, they're very dangerous political games. And we see the situation happening in Macedonia where the climate worsens, tensions build up, and then somebody comes out with these bombastic populist nationalist pronouncements, we want our own mini republic or this and that, right? It's very dangerous. And I think we need to move towards substantive rationalization, democratization, and really cohesive state building, right? Not this continuous fragmentation. Because if you have an authoritarian political culture, if you divide it by 2, if you divide it by 12, if you divide it by 24, you're still going to have an authoritarian political culture, just in miniature, right? That's the thing.
You describe it as a very dire scenario, and it's interesting that a suggestion like this in a context of Bosnia specifically came from members of the European Parliament. And I think I would like to segue now into asking Goran about the role of the international community and considering the length of international presence in the region, US and EU both, and specifically the process of EU integration. What went wrong? Why is this process of EU integration not working in the Balkans the way it had worked in Central Europe?
I think this is the only process that we have on the table. I mean, and we still somehow must believe in that.
Let's make sure your mic works. Yes. Let's try again.
Yeah. Is it on? So I think this is the only process that we have on table at the moment. I think battery.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. Is it okay?
Fine.
Is it working now?
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I think this is the only process that we have on table. However, European Union is at the moment quite weak, and local elites understand, and politicians in the Balkans understand quite well that the European Union is weak. And now they understand and they think that the United States is weak as well. And they see that this part of the world, Western part of the world, is more or less dead or with serious trouble. So from that perspective, I think that they understood that interest of the West at the moment is to maintain stable level of instability. And that West will give some money, some good portion of money to maintain to them. I'm talking about governments, all governments in the region, to maintain this level of stability. That's how they perceive European integration. That's the problem. And I think if we are perceiving here European integration as some changes, as some reforms, as some as transition, as changes in society, but I think that elites are not perceiving like that. They are perceiving that as maintaining on the same level as this level of corruption, of destroyed institutions and stuff like that. So there is not some big will for reforms, and I think this is the crucial trouble. What went wrong? I think that in one moment we start believe that governments in the region and present politicians can deliver a change without civil society, and we saw many governments, I'm not talking about US, but many European governments believe that we should not include civil society and other actors in societies. So that only governments can deliver a change, and they are very committed and dedicated to that change. I think this is the first reason. Second reason, we didn't take them accountable. We were not clear what we expect from them, what they should deliver. If anyone, any actor is giving, like any European government is giving some funds to some government, we didn't say what we expect from them to that fund. So everything is quite open, everything is quite general. It is not concrete. I mean, if you say, for example, I don't know, reform of judiciary. What do you expect from that money? And that's the big issue. Lack of clear and strong messages to governments in the region is also one big problem. We were not clear at the end. Those messages were not strong, and they always find allies, especially in EU, that will understand them, and they have perception that they will have understand for such bad policy. Also, I think analyze and assessment of the key actors in the region were done properly. I think that much more effort and support should be given to civil society. Of course, civil society cannot deliver all changes, and it is not realistic to expect from civil society much. But I think if you look how support went, governments received much more support than civil society in the region.
So some of the things that Goran is explaining, particularly some of the institutional weaknesses, and I think Karl also mentioned this in his address, are being potentially exploited by some other actors, external actors in this case. So Russia was mentioned, Andrei. And can you tell us a little bit about what your assessment of Russia's role is? Is it a concern, and what specifically is the concern?
I promoted first of all this idea that we may be easily used by Russians, particularly Kremlin, for any future fires in Europe as a very good and very easygoing material to be used. And that's very clear from, you just need to read papers and figure out that this is potential. But then we come to the very concrete balance which we used to be having especially in Serbia, but in the whole Balkans, with engagement of United States of America, especially jointly with the EU and Russia on the other side, and the other actors. We have very particular actors as China who came on the board. So for me, I think it's the biggest trouble that the process of Russia's support to Serbian political elite and institutions is not transparent. I really don't have any trouble with Russian investments coming to the Western Balkans in many different places, but what I have problem with is that there is no transparency of this processes. And then we come to very suspicious moments like specific humanitarian aid center in Niš. Then we come to very, I would say like strange interactions between Russian ambassadors in the region and particular political party members and representatives. Then we come to remember the Montenegro case, which we should not forget, and I want to put very huge mark on that, which is the reaction and action of foreign, particularly Russian actors in the whole Montenegro election situation. And actually you see that this transatlantic project, which we were mentioning in the previous discussions, is somehow out of the box, or people who are trying to keep up the project in the box in the region are under attack. And then we come to the point of media and how this Russian propaganda or influence of different stakeholders is there. And when you read the articles and when you read examples of defending of Russia, you just need to ask yourself, who attacked Russia? Then we need to have this defense in all of the media around the region. So what I'm saying is that influence and presence of Russia in the region is much bigger than even people can consider, especially here in Washington, D.C., and that reaction and action and actually very close watching what is going on is needed, especially in terms of attacking civil society members. Carl mentioned the case of Youth Initiative for Human Rights doors, and you may say this is nothing, like they just put some papers, they said you are paid by Soros, and that's it. But the point is that those groups, when you see them on this security camera, those groups and actually actions of those groups in many other countries, especially I may use examples of Belarus, Ukraine, and different other, are not to be like so light as they are now in this particular case. When we say light, nobody was beaten, so that's lightness. And I think we should be very worried about those questions, and we should be very worried for the security of particular human rights defenders and civil society representatives, even though this should not leave us outside of discussion how good and how achievable are goals of many of those actors on the ground. What I'm saying is that sometimes in this understanding of how much money goes to government and how much money goes to civil society, I would say support is needed for both sides, but we should consider how we measure and how we protect what we want to achieve with this money. So this is something what should be considered as well. So I think Russia is playing very, very important role. From my point of view, very bad role. I don't want to see Belgrade being the new Kiev.
So let's explore this a little bit further, because there's quite a bit of discussion, as you can imagine, here in Washington on this possible role of Russia, and specifically in its immediate neighborhood. But there are two events in particular, or two elements in particular, that you mentioned that go a little bit further than anything that we've seen in some of the other areas, of course, aside from Ukraine and what happened there. And those are the Montenegro case you mentioned and the humanitarian base. So let's start with Montenegro. Speaking about maybe a little bit in more detail about the election and the events around the election for the benefit of those who may not know the details, can you tell us why you have a concern that this model, this approach, may be applied in other elections, most notably the upcoming elections in Serbia this spring?
Because, repeating is Balkan policy. So, I really believe that when one thing once pass to anybody, it can pass again, especially with us. We have very short memory, not just we, but I would say that we live in a world of short memory now. The Montenegro case is, very clear with the influence of the others. And what is not clear and what we should have in mind is I'm not the one, and many people know that, who would say Vučić is so bad and, all of the election things are bad. No, I believe Prime Minister of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, did some great things. And I would say we should support all of his efforts to try to modernize and open, or whatever word you want to use, Serbia. But the biggest trouble is that beyond the enemies which we see as enemies of Vučić, or we can see as other political options, we should speak about those options which will stop anybody, including Vučić, even some other who are much more nationalistic, if they try to push this agenda, will stop them in normalization of relations with Kosovo, in fighting with war crimes, in finding the truth. We are speaking about the whole institutional system, which can be very easily, as we saw in Montenegro case, used by those, I would say, bad foreign powers to destroy and to kind of make troubles on our future elections. We still don't know who's going to be the presidential candidate of Vučić party. And we see a lot of messages, and we see a lot of strange pressures coming especially from Russia. And if you read newspapers in Serbia, you're going to find out very particular cases. I just don't want to go to details, but we may speak about that. So I think even though every momentum in Balkans is so crucial, this one is really very important, because this will be fight between again, between two sides, as I see it. On one side you have those people who, with different, I would say, ideological and political views, me as a human rights activist saying for Aleksandar Vučić we should support him, this is kind of a strange, and somebody may say he's paying me or something like that. But no, I really believe in the situation where he was, that he did some good things, and there is no reason for us not to say that. Where he needs to be clear is, would he allow his party members to beat youth initiative activists and fight human rights activists and destroy internal democracy, and on the other side go and meet NATO representatives in Davos and say Serbia will move forward in collaboration and cooperation. Those two things, they don't go together. So if you ask me what is the Russian influence and what I want to see as our influence, because I'm defining myself as belonging to political West, I want to see Vučić on our side. So I want to see the elections and actually this influence to be, that we are aware what they did in Montenegro case, because no one believed. If you remember, we had small debate similar to this one just right after Montenegro elections. What we spoke on the meeting that day happened to get out on media 2 weeks later, which is strange. We are not people with a lot of access to any security details, but it's very strange that for everybody this very open action, and that's a new model, in a way open action happened there, and I think we have those open actions all around. So from my point of view, I think it's very important not to leave the elections and not to leave the electoral process in all Western Balkans. We're going to be having very soon other countries' elections as well. This is momentum when all of the countries need to have strong watch from here, and that's very important.
So could this threat go a little bit further? Like Karl has cited Janusz Bogajski, who says that this could be the area where the U.S. could face a geopolitical test. And specifically, you mentioned this humanitarian base in south of Serbia. By all accounts, this base could be a little bit more than what it appears to be from the outside, and there could be others actually in Serbia. So I'm curious to explore. I mean, I know that a lot of this is speculation, so we'll preface it with that caveat. But is this a concern to you personally?
It is. I would say today we have in Brussels meeting of Prime Minister Vučić and Mustafa, and they follow up the Brussels dialogue on Kosovo-Serbia relations. We will see what will be end of this discussion today. But in these predictions, or however we want to say it, when we speak about this specific niche building, place, space, however you want to call it, I never been there, but it's a neighborhood of my home. Part of the land is actually used to belong to some of the family members. And when you see it, it doesn't look like humanitarian aid center. And it's very nearby Bonstil, and it's very nearby Kosovo. And I can give you like hundreds of arguments why this is suspicious to me to have it right there, and requested on the north part of Serbia as well to have kind of a branch of the niche one. So if any of the Serbian governments were doing decentralization and you had a lot of requests, Russian did it. So they have their center in Niš, and in the north part of Serbia they are asking for other. And for me this is seriously threat, because people who were there, and the footage which I saw is just saying that there are some bigger engagements than humanitarian aid to Syria and different other things. So what I'm saying is, when you compare this engagement to the engagement of 99, 2000, 2001, even 2005, even the momentum of arresting Radovan Karadzic, you see much more open and much more, visible actions of different actors concerning not just niche, but different other things, And we may speak about those. I was spending my time here at NED researching specific soft power mechanisms which Russia used, not just in Serbia, but in many other countries, which are used to be seen in a Cold War, as a mechanism of propaganda or different other actions. What I'm saying is we should, pay much more attention on the specific details and not leave small actions of different actors to be unseen, because that's the biggest problem. As I said in the start, it's not a problem that some foreign country, we have many others, we have the other investors in Western Balkans like Saudi Arabia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, many other countries, and I'm using them as example because it's not just question of Russia, it's question of many other non-West countries which are coming there on board. And it's a serious question for Washington and for Brussels and for many other countries, why Serbia and why Western Balkans countries are turning much more to the other side than to this side. What is the problem? And I see that the problem it is in us, but as well there is a problem in lack of willingness and understanding how to support and how to finish job, because that's the key issue. We still didn't finish job there, and we are in the last moment of making our cake, and then somebody may come and destroy the whole cake with very bad sugar on the side.
You're going to make us hungry before our lunch is served. I would like to go back in a minute to this, what you just mentioned about other influences and presences of others in the region. But let me actually ask Yasmin. Andrei spoke about Russia mostly in context of Serbia. But I think it's safe to assume that this is not just the only country in which Russia has its interests and strategic interests. How do you see Russia's role in some of the other countries, Bosnia or even Macedonia?
I mean, there was a point that was raised earlier that I think really needs to be reiterated, and namely that as far as the Balkan elite wholesale are concerned, there is now a widespread perception that the Euro-Atlantic project is over. Right? After Brexit, after the election in the United States, this is done. I mean, whether the EU unravels tomorrow or whether it unravels 25 years from now, those seeds have now been planted. You have an administration in Washington now that is signaling that it apparently wants to disengage from NATO. it's possible that NATO becomes, a German-led alliance rather than an American-led alliance. But that'll be a huge transition, and that would be a long process. And in that interim, those local elites in the Balkans, the one thing that they have always been historically very adept at is figuring out when the ship is sinking and getting off, right? That's how we see exactly the same people that were in power in the 1980s, right, that were all loyal communists, are now loyal nationalists, Western, whatever they want to label themselves as, but it's literally the same people, right? They have a kind of elastic authoritarian methodology that they're very good at employing and deploying. So they're looking for new partners. They're looking at the Russians in particular, and as it concerns the Russians, I think vis-a-vis the relationship with Serbia, in Serbia, Russia sees a relatively stable partner. But Russia's methodology and how Russia leverages its actual sort of hard power disadvantages when compared to the United States and even to the EU is that it finds these marginal cases. I fully expect that in the next year or so we're going to see a much more explicit alignment of the government in Skopje with Russia. We know that the Dodik administration in Banja Luka, in the Republika Srpska entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is desperate to become a satellite of Russia. I mean, they can't help themselves how much they want it, right? I mean, every third week there was a period where Mr. Dodik was either saying he was going to Moscow or he was in Moscow, right? I think the Russians are not that interested in the RS per se, other than understanding that this is, a potential flashpoint. So right now, I think they're just kind of throwing them bones. But in the next few months and possibly in the next year or two, I would not at all be surprised to see the Russians make a much more serious play there, because you have to remember, towards the end of 2014 and going into 2015, before this whole holiday fiasco and referendum circus in Bosnia, we had a much more alarming situation, which was when the government and the RS decided to momentarily pull out of the central police structures in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we were this far away from an actual shooting incident between the state police and the RS police. That was incredibly alarming. And I think that was a wake-up call to many people in the international community who dealt with Bosnia. But that was incredibly alarming. And I'm very, very afraid, and I'm very concerned that kind of situation can and will play out again, and that the next time that it plays out, that the Russians will step in and feed that fire. And that would be disastrous, not just for Bosnia and Herzegovina, it would be disastrous for the region. Whatever we may believe, Bosnia and Herzegovina is the strategic and political core of this region. I maintain that. And we're in a situation now, unlike in the 1990s, where any kind of instability in the Balkans, serious instability, cannot be contained, right? It won't be like the 1990s, because you have the wholesale unraveling of the Middle East, you have Turkey in a headlong rush to autocracy, the membrane, which is the Western Balkans, between the core of Europe and utter chaos in the Middle East, is the Western Balkans, and these democracies are failing. Right? So that is why the stakes at this moment are incredibly high, even if we're still largely talking about, as Andrej was saying, kind of games in the shadows.
Wow, I think this is going to inspire quite a few questions. So I'm going to leave it right at that so that others can probe this more. Andrej mentioned some other influences from foreign government influences, and I think that some of those may come as a surprise to some of the people in the audience. I think Azerbaijan was mentioned, Kazakhstan. I think the Gulf states, are a more obvious one. Can you tell us a little bit more, Goran, about the presence of these countries, how it's manifested, and to what purpose?
Yeah, I think we underestimate the influence of those countries, and especially Russia, and we need to analyze. And it's very simple to analyze. So all those pro-Russian forces, and let's say it's not pro-Russian. I mean, Russia should be respected, but pro-Putin forces, what they offer, not only to Serbia, to their allies in the region, what they offer, what's the key message of them? Apart from messages like no abortion, no gay prides, or stuff like that, we should skip it. That's the usual thing. But what they are demanding, what they are telling people, no EU. That's the only thing they are always promoting. No EU. We should not enter EU, and we should not adopt any EU values and EU reforms. That's it. That's what they demand, and that's their message. I don't see nothing much except that. From them. So this is something what came from Russia, and I think the similar message and similar influences are coming from China, from Azerbaijan, from now Kazakhstan and other, Belarus especially. They are very active, and they are very big friends, especially with Serbia, and at the same time with Dodik. I mean, it is very interesting how they play, and they are promoting the same values actually Russia, and coming with the money, with some really big money, and they're delivering something concrete. Is it road or bridge or something else? But for people, this is something very, very positive. And then when you look at the opinion polls, people believe, first of all, I mean, maybe Serbs in Bosnia, and also Serbs in Serbia, some in Montenegro as well. They think that they want Russian values. They want to live in EU. But they want Russian values, and if you ask them who is supporting Serbia the most, they say Russia. They don't say EU or United States. They say the biggest financial supporter to Serbia is Russia, and while Russia is giving almost zero donations to Serbian government and so on. So I think that the Russians are very successful at the moment. Their influence is very good and very successful. They are doing it in very right way. They are very cost efficient. They are giving a small amount of money, but they're getting a lot. I think that those forces are now becoming more and more serious, because at the very beginning we underestimate them. And what you can read especially in Serbian media, but also in other media in the region, are that state is more or less collapsed. I mean, more or less. EU is also quite bad. But on the other hand, what you're reading about Russia is yesterday I read in Blitz, that is biggest newspaper in the region, I think, and they say this is the aircraft because of NATO generals are shaking. So they are presenting us some new Russian plane that is not made yet. It's just a plane. They say that NATO generals are shaking because of that plane. That's quite a usual message. They are promoting all Russian, something new from Russia, boat or anything, and they are saying that this is really wow, and everything what is happening in Russia is very positive, while everything is coming from West is negative, more or less. And they are of course promoting. I must say that, but this is true. They are promoting Trump. They are promoting Le Pen. They are promoting some usual guys as a friends of some political circles in the Balkans. And I think they are connecting those circles with Russia. And this is what we have on table. I think this is quite dangerous on a long run. I don't think that war will happen, I don't know, or something like that in 3 years or 5 years. But I think some small incidents, like not so small incidents like we had in Macedonia. Mm-hmm. I mean, from my perspective, this is extremely dangerous. And I think that this can happen again. And I think that the reaction of Western countries at the moment will not be that good. I mean, at least partially good as we have like 3 or 5 years ago. I think it will be much more slower, and because all politicians know that Brussels is more or less blocked and they just want some kind of stability. So I'm very, very much afraid what will happen with that scenario, and I think that Russia is playing excellent game from that perspective. Putin is playing excellent game, and if you don't agree, maybe you should just watch the example of Transnistria in Moldova. I mean, it's not that close. I mean, and they don't want to have Moldova as part of Russia, which is the same with the Balkans. It's a bit far away from Russia, but still that influence is good enough to have a kind of frozen conflict or frozen instability, let's say, frozen instability, which is very good from Russian perspective, and I think that Putin will play on that role, and I think it's very it's time to act at the moment.
Before I turn to my last round of questions, Andrei sounded like he wanted to say something, right as other countries were mentioned.
I don't want to put China in the same portion as Russia, because the mechanisms are different and the reasons and motivation is completely different. I would say that China is having bigger interest in Europe than before, and in Belgrade, and I'm very happy as a theater person, we're going to be having the hugest Chinese cultural center with the amazing plan for 100 years. I never saw that any cultural institution make 100-year plan. They did. And you know, we may laugh, I did the same, but this is like something very serious, because my problem is not that so-called enemy, in this case, is making plans. My problem is that we, on the other side of the enemy, are not having plans. And that's something what we should think about and work on that, because in last 15 years of my connection to Washington, D.C., I don't remember any other time when Washington was so not worried for Balkans. You know, this full room makes me more than happy after 4 months in DC. What I'm not happy about is that I know half of the room, but you know, this is something what really we need to think. Who are American people on the ground? On the value base, I'm not speaking working for United States, but to whom, let's say, democracy people around DC or people who were promoting those values can connect with. Who are those people? They exist? What is the investment from here in those people? I would just remind you of great achievements of United States of America in bringing to justice. I will not speak about the justice, we can reevaluate that before on ICTY, but the whole action of bringing criminals in front of the justice. It was impossible. I remember I was in this particular room in 2005, and some of the people around the room were as well here. We were discussing arresting of Karadzic and Mladic. It looked like it will never happen. In the end, it happened. What I'm saying is there are models, there are mechanisms. We just don't want to use them because of something what I really don't get in the particular Balkan case. I can get the change of the policy and all of that, but you know, it's time to evaluate this change, I believe.
Go ahead.
I mean, I just very quickly want to bounce off that point. The thing that the policy paper that you've mentioned a number of times now, I think makes a very strong case for something very specific, and it comes out of Andrei's comments as well, namely that actually a relatively small investment, not just in hard power, but in soft power in this region, would pay tremendous dividends. I don't think people both in Brussels and Washington appreciate how much of a perception there is in the region that Europe and the United States have disengaged, right? And so I know this from working in Sarajevo in particular. There is still a kind of, I don't want to say awe, but there is an incredible amount of seriousness and respect when the United States acts. Just a couple weeks ago, we saw the Treasury Board finally sanction Mr. Dodik in particular for clear violations of the Dayton Peace Accords, right? This was a major, major move, right? It was a small move, but it has already had major, major effects. And I'll tell you exactly how we can measure that. Mr. Dodik, who's very famous for his very boisterous and braggadocious kind of style, when that decision came down, was MIA. There was no statements. There was little things leaking out here and there, but he basically came out and said a couple days after the fact, well, yes, I expected this. There was none of the, we're gonna build an army, we're gonna build an armada, none of this. It was gone. What was also very important was that there was next to no comment from Mr. Dragan Čović of the HDZ, and Mr. Bakir Izetbegović as well came out with a very sort of limp statement that, this is very bad for Bosnia, we're all very embarrassed. it showed you how much of an effect that had. Because financial leverage, which is something that can be done very, very easily, both by the EU through money val programs, anti-corruption, anti-laundering, right? Which is also incidentally why these political elites have resisted those programs the most, has a huge effect, especially in places like Bosnia and Macedonia, where there is an actual architecture to employ these things, but in the region as a whole.
We mentioned yesterday, we remembered, and I think in the context of ICTY cooperation, the Lautenberg provision, I think some of you in the room may remember it, which basically used this very tool of conditioning, yeah, I'm looking at the person right now, which basically used foreign aid, development aid, as a leverage to make some of these changes. And I'm glad that you both segued into this last portion of our discussion, because this is Washington after all, and people like ideas and suggestions here. So what is your suggestion based on the lesson that we have now from these sanctions episodes, to call it that? What would you suggest to policymakers?
I mean, in the interim, I would hope, and one of the things that I've, in my very limited capacity, what I've been pressing for is that I would like to see the Europeans get on board with these sanctions. If not the EU as a whole, then individual countries. It would be great if the UK could come on board, Germany in particular. And they need to be maintained. Right, they need to be maintained until we see credible, serious movement towards reform. I mean, today we saw a headline in the Bosnian newspapers that Bosnia received the EU questionnaire a couple months ago. The RS institutions have not filled out a single question. That's unacceptable, right? I mean, at the very least, freeze the process right there and then, right? Which includes also cutting off the money. That's what we need to finally get around, and understanding that these countries are completely dependent on Western monies in terms of credible projects. As was said, Russia is providing actually zero money. If they want to play that game, fine, go to the Russians. See if they'll give you the money. They won't, right? And then you put them in this impossible position. Aside from that, though, these particular sanctions need to be maintained on Mr. Dodik. They need to be expanded as needed to the other members of his cabinet. They need to be potentially expanded also to Mr. Čović and Mr. Izetbegović. If we want the Sejdić-Finci question to be resolved, if we want Mostar to be resolved, it's unacceptable. People in Mostar have not voted since 2008. It's not even no longer a managed democracy. It's just not a democracy. And now we've seen that spread to Stolets, right? It's farcical. So this is a very credible mechanism that can be used, should be used, and will get effects. It's already had effects, right?
So there was a time when a tool like this really would have made the difference potentially, and that was at the time where the IMF loan was being decided. And I know that what happened around that time is a matter of symbolism that you find very important, and that is in how the EU and US engage with local actors. So tell us what irritates you in particular, and what would you like to see going forward?
So this is going to sound like a bizarre pet peeve, but it's really, really not, right? So we have this incredibly problematic tendency in the region. It's especially bad in Bosnia, but it's a regional thing, where major political summits, including those with international representatives, happen in restaurants, they happen in hotel bars, they happen, I kid you not, at gas stations with restaurants attached, right? Middle of nowhere, outside of public view, outside of parliamentary institutions, outside of media attention. This is unacceptable. If you're going to have any serious policymaker coming, especially on an official visit, this needs to happen in official institutions. There needs to be clear documentation of what was discussed. I mean, I understand the need for closed-door meetings, but please, there needs to be memoranda released to the media and to the public, right? This is an incredibly important symbolic investment in the legitimacy and credibility of democratic institutions in a region where those institutions are still incredibly weak, right? And especially when you decide to make major moves, like we're going to give you an IMF loan. Please do not negotiate an IMF loan at a gas station, right? Because all it ends up looking like is hush money. Right? This is Gonan's point about this like stable level of instability. Like, please don't start a war. Please don't start a war. It's absolutely horrendous, and the way that it undermines public perceptions of the United States, of the EU, of the broader or what remains of the Euro-Atlantic project is incredible. It's devastating.
Okay, I hope this note's been taken by some of the folks.
We didn't mention
who have
Kosovo at all, but this is
influences.
important.
But Goran wanted to say something before.
I think good example, Andre mentioned justice. And it's very interesting. I mean, I agree with that this should be priority in the region, everywhere in the region, no country in the region. And when I'm talking to some friends, you know, we say, well, but United States is very stable. They have stable institutions and free elections and stuff like that. And the key part of stable institutions is always judiciary. And we want that in the Balkans, so on. And at the moment, of course, we are investing a lot of money. United States is investing a lot of money. European Union is investing. Countries are giving a lot of development aid in that regard. And what EU is doing during negotiation, they say, okay, we now open chapter 23, which is judiciary, including human rights and judiciary. But this chapter will be the last that we will close in the negotiation. What that exactly means? That means, okay, you start reform now, and you will finish it in 2025 or later, because countries will enter later. So what they are doing on the field, they know that they should do nothing. They will not do anything. I have members of my board visiting Serbia, and then there was several lawyers in the board, and then they asked, okay, but what about judiciary and reform? And then Minister for European Integration say, yeah, we have a plan. You know, my Swedish colleagues are very happy when they heard that there is a plan, and they say, well, in 2019 we will adopt new constitution, and you know, in 2019, I mean, new constitution, and then after that we will start a reform. And then one colleague asked, but what citizens will do until 2020 something? So this is the way they are thinking. They are trying to avoid reforms. And I think, for example, reform of judiciary must be done yesterday. Yeah. And not wait, you know, another 5 years, and that's really a big problem. And if you ask me where this enormous amount of money for judiciary is going, it's horrible. I mean, I agree that we need to have buildings and stuff like that, but they are going basically to some lovely buildings, while what is happening inside the building is absolutely not in focus of any development aid.
So, Andrei, I know you wanted to say something. Try to stay on this track of sending a message so that we can wrap with that.
But we should have in mind that if we want to have constitution earlier, there is a need for political consolidation in Serbia. So what I'm saying is we should not forget, we are always speaking about the public things which we get from media, from all of the public events and all of that, but we should not forget very strong influence of those, let's call them dark forces, which run Balkans for last 25, 30 years. And I'm speaking about unreformed security services, unreformed armed and parts of the armies, or whatever you want to call some of the military forces which are existing there. And don't forget that in many countries, especially in Kosovo and Bosnia, we have a lot of guns in possession of people and all of that. This is real and serious security threat. So in many of those cases, when we want to see some reform, if we want to be fair enough and just enough, we should say the threats coming from the institutions are not just lack of the will of political elite to deal with some issues. We have serious resistance within the system. And what we should do there, we should work on the target, which is key target. And key target in this case is deal with those issues and deal with those people who were involved even in very massive crimes in the 90s, including genocide. We still didn't focus on how to build our institution with a little bit of dignity for the victims and a little bit of dignity for the reform of the institutions. And having in mind the background of our prime minister and the most popular political party in Serbia, and having in mind what happened with all of the, let's say, non-conservative votes in Serbia, but the similar situation is going on in all of the other countries in the region. And let me just, the last thing, what to do there, we have this train. And, you know, let me tell you, I wanted small train here today, but Ivana didn't allow me, like small childish one that I can play game. And this game about train made us in a position to see that it's needed just one afternoon to unfrozen this conflict. And that it's needed somehow to be aware that all of those softly and easily fixed things in the Balkans, which what happened in many cases, celebrations over agreements and many other things are not actually fixed. They're just covered, like, you know, like when your parents are coming to visit your student room. So
your suggestion?
Suggestion is we need to work on that. We need to uncover that and say to parents, that's it.
So comprehensive. True and comprehensive reforms, cleanup,
Yeah.
true and comprehensive cleanup.
Support actors, actually, to be precise, I think the political West should pay more attention and support political actors, critical ones and those who are trying to do stuff. There are people, even within political option, which is not my option, you know, which is not something where I will ever vote for. But we should be realistic and we should say, those are people doing good job. Let's help them.
Okay, more explicit support, moral and financial, I assume.
Any kind of support. I think this, what Carl did in the start of this event for Anita and Youth Initiative, and I assume activists from all around Balkans for Youth Initiative are watching this, is very important because, you know, this feeling, I was in this situation so many times, this feeling that you're sitting alone in your room, in your office in Belgrade, and somebody is putting, you know, money, like fake money, US dollars, I hope it was proper money, but it's not, in front of your doors, it's really bad feeling. And I think that we should consider rebuilding the solidarity actions, and it's not just question of money. You know, everybody would say there is no money in Balkans. There is no maybe money like in 2005 that you can open office with 25 deputy chiefs, but there are enough sources, I would say, for action, which is important for critical and very, how to say, important allies of the value system where we want to be and where we want to belong. So ambassadors, different actors should support those people. You know, Biden was there. He didn't meet any opposition. He didn't meet any critical voice. He just met the governments. So is that the message of the United States of America? I've been convinced by several members of different institutions here that this was like something, but then after that we had a couple of other delegations, a similar situation. Why? Is that opinion? Is that statement? Is that something? It is. And it sends very strong message that those actors are left alone. And I'm going to ask you, you know, NDI and I did great work in many political parties in reforming them, in why they are not more there. You know, and I know they're going to say, I know their answer directly from them, but that's a question for bigger, you know, consideration than we can have. Like, are we really believing there is no need to work with political parties in Balkans anymore? You know, we have to. I'm watching you.
I don't think my colleagues from the political party institutes think that it's no longer needed. I'm going to put my glasses on, hoping that I can recognize some of the folks that have, and I think Professor John Lampe had his hand up first. I will ask just really quickly for some protocol here to introduce yourself and the institution you're representing. Please, if you want to make remarks, this is fine, but as a moderator and a tough one, as this is my reputation, I reserve the right to interrupt you at roughly 5 or so sentences.
I have a question. Here come the small script, handwritten. John Lampe, Wilson Center and former East European Studies Director, author of, with Leonard Cohen, of Embracing Democracy in the Western Balkans in 2011. Sinking like a stone. But anyway, appreciating this meeting to talk about an area that in our presidential campaigns and in the new administration is not a word, never mentioned. But never mind, let's mention it now. And what I want to mention, and in line with some remarks I'll make at the Wilson Center next week on Wednesday on my Balkan update, I was at the Balkan Security Forum in October, where we had this love fest between Rama and Vucic, and both of them saying, we don't expect this EU membership soon, but the process is important, it's so valuable, we're going to keep doing it, we're going ahead, and then this appreciation from the American embassy and representatives, and Misha Glenny pointing out in his Vremya article that, well, yes, this is the American favorite. And so the question I have for the group is, what about this Vučić option that he's playing in this EU process and American direction versus what I heard was Nikolić and people around him inclined toward the Russian option, and the Serbian public divided between them, mainly concerned that that awful Hillary who bombed us wouldn't win the election. But in any event, is there some a premium in going ahead with the Vučić option, or are there such objections that I'll be swept aside here?
I think we'll have some disagreement on. Well, we have quite a bit of time still left, so I will go ahead and let you respond. And towards the end, if we see that we're running out of time, we can group the questions together. Andrei, go ahead.
Please.
I dare say there's a little bit of disagreement here on the stage on perhaps how the question will be answered, so we'll see if we get to see that or not.
And I love this debate, and I think you're going to love this debate. But the whole point is, yeah, of course, Vučić, Nikolić, and that dilemma which you mentioned, that division, we are watching right now, right here in newspapers, like this morning, some strange things. Like, for example, you have Nikolić, and I'm giving just those small details just to show the plate where we are for those people who are not covering very closely. We are expecting decision to see, will Vučić be presidential candidate? Will we have parliamentary elections? Would Toma Nikolić stay Vučić candidate, and who will be on the other side? For now, we know there are two candidates. One is known to you, Vuk Jeremić, our ex-foreign minister, and the other one is Saša Janković, the ombudsperson, who said he's going to put his candidacy. And we still don't know what's going to happen with... Šešelj is there, but I'm not counting him. But it's very important. And then we come to Šešelj. What's going to happen in the second round? Would we have Vučić and Šešelj? Would we have Toma Nikolić and Šešelj? Is it possible that Vuk Jeremić can go to direction to be Vučić and Vuk Jeremić? Can then opposition deal with that to support Vuk Jeremić? Will Vuk Jeremić be Vučić candidate? No, maybe Vučić is not there. And a lot of things we can read in all of the media. But the whole point is, there is a clear division in the policy level between president and prime minister. And it doesn't mean they're not together. They're not trying to stay together. They're not hoping to stay together. But there is a division. Toma Nikolić is much more on this, I would call it, traditional nationalistic type of policy, and Vučić is trying, even with this Rama case, to be on the other side. So is there a division among voters? There is a division among MPs. So everybody who is saying Vučić is having all power should keep in mind that part of the MPs are belonging to the policies and values of Toma Nikolić. So we cannot speak anymore about absolute power, because this is not right. He is not having absolute power. Why he would need to have 2/3 of the parliament to change constitution? And we need a change of constitution if we want to join EU. How are they going to do it? What is the way to do it? So there are many of those questions and many answers, but I would say, if you ask me what to do with Vučić when he is attacking human rights activists, beating, people, a lot of those things, I think we are watching the policy where, for the public, especially international public on Belgrade Security Forum, with his friend Rama, and in their joint action, they support each other. But then on the other side, and he is doing some great stuff in work with him, like, for example, establishing youth regional office for exchanges, some reconciliation mechanisms, there is a truth commission, and all of that. But then he come back and say, all of those people who actually, and who created Rajko idea, this regional youth office supported by Vučić and Rama, Anita Mitić, who was attacked in Beška, mentioned in the start of Karl's speech. She was the one, and the Youth Initiative was the one from 2003 requesting that type of office. all the time. So you have those who created this policy being now attacked in Serbia, and they actually created some positive policy for prime minister. So what to do with him? My option and my choice, according to all of the arguments which I have, is even all of those attacks, even all of those things where I disagree with him, having in mind political reality, I think we need to be clear and say those are good things, those are bad things. And we should support good things and say for bad things, they are bad things, we do not support you there. We're going to strongly disagree on attack of human rights activists and media. Because any other option in which we believe that, you know, I don't know which of those kids' stories I'm going to use as example, exist in Serbia and in Serbian politics, or in any other politics, is really unrealistic. You know, I know that some of the basic values for people here or in many West countries, it's not clear how those people cannot have them. You know, we were discussing yesterday corruption. That's a good case, and I ask you, how do you define corruption? Because that's something what we also need to consider in evaluating those politicians, evaluating what they do. Because there are many different, reasons why they made this or that decision. What I'm saying, I think we need to work with him.
Goran smiled. Here it goes. Here it goes.
Sure.
Here it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the assessment about when we are making division between Nikolic and Vučić. That's fine. I'm fine with that division. But I'm judging every politician or everyone, especially not politicians, but people that are in the government. I'm judging having in mind what they are doing, and I have the same thing. They are accountable. I mean, we have executive branch, we have judicial branch. They are accountable for many things for all things that are happening in the country. If human rights defenders are attacked, I mean, they are accountable. We need to very proper investigation. We need them to bring to justice, and it's very simple. We know the procedure. We know what must be done. In the last case about attack on Unity Initiative, they start attacking Unity Initiative on TV. Instead of having investigation, they are further attacking and telling us that they are paying from the West. And I think that the Vučić is accountable for that part. And of course, we are working with the government. Of course, civil society government should deliver change, and civil society should be there and help and work with the government. But the key question is how. We should not send the message to civil society that they should be bribed, that they should stop criticizing government, and that they should stop being watchdog organization and have watchdog function. My idea is that we should work with the government, but we should have a clear demand how government should behave, and not to forget accountability of all duty holders. And we know what they need to do, and I think that this is not happening from Vučić's side, and he's trying to silence more or less all critical voices. I will always say that some things that he's doing are very good. I mean, I think that negotiations with Kosovo are good, and that he's delivering something, not too much, but something. I think that, for example, gay pride was a positive step. I think adoption of some laws were also good and positive step. But out of 100%, this is about 15% or 20%. Okay. Other things that he's doing are not acceptable from my perspective.
Brief intervention by Yasmin, because I know there's quite a few people.
I'll be very quick.
With their hands raised.
I tend to be more sympathetic to Goran's point, and to that point, I would just say that we should keep in mind the experience of Mr. Orban and gentlemen like that, which is to say, what is the end game if we're going to deal with people like Mr. Vučić? And I'm not saying that we don't deal with them. Of course we do. But keep and understand that there will come a point where he will perceive that he no longer needs us. And then, once again, all options will be on the table. The other thing that I would very quickly say about the Eddie Vučić summit is, to my mind, the Albania-Serbia spat is a little bit like that old joke about Bosnia. You know, like Serbia and Croatia had a war and Bosnia lost, except with Kosovo having the role of Bosnia now. Which is to say that I'm not really sure what the basis of this supposed Albania-Serbia feud is, but everyone in Europe suddenly rushed in to, prevent this war.
That's because you're anti-Albanian. Yes, you are. That's the Yugoslavian racism.
No, oh, please. No. It's a non. I know, but they might not. No, the point is that it's a non-issue, right? And it was a by and large a manufactured crisis by Tirana and Belgrade to have this positive 15%. To end up creating the youth office, which is great, which is fantastic, but it was once again evidence that these local elites perceived that the proper way to deal with the international community is that you create crises and then the West comes in and solves it for you.
Or West keep the crisis, like in Kosovo, and you don't know what to do with that.
Ouch. Obrat Kesić.
Thank you. I apologize in advance, but since the RS has been, let's say, mentioned
quite a few times.
I have a question.
I'll allow you 2 extra sentences.
Obrat Kesić, I'm the director of the Republika Srpska office here in Washington, D.C. First and foremost, let me just clear the air of a few things that were stated here as fact, but are fiction. First, in terms of...
We'll have the truthometer check that.
Hopefully they'll do a better job than they did with calling me to get my opinion on the story that they printed without talking to me. So hopefully they'll be much better than that and adhere to the code of conduct that they signed with Pointer, because otherwise it's totally irresponsible and it's fake news. Yeah. So let's, but let's set aside the personal issue. We talked about the rule of law. And there was a lot of lip service of that. And you talked about the sanctions. But there's a big problem with the sanctions against Dodik. First and foremost, here in this country, we just had a Supreme Court justice nominated. And I've been listening this morning to people talking, Democrats, who say the Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court has lost its credibility through 5-4 decisions. What do we say about the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina? That not only has it been outvoting of Serb and Croat judges by Bosniak and 3 foreign judges, and this has been crucial decisions that have changed the Dayton Accords. That's credible. So that's the basis of the dispute with President Dodik, but not just President Dodik, because he didn't decide to hold a referendum. The referendum was a decision of the parliament of Republika Srpska, in which all of the parties, including, you can laugh, Yasmin, but you didn't mention any of the parties that are on the state level. I think that's intentional on your part, because they're doing what you would like them to do. And that's a problem, because you are a political activist and you're choosing sides. But that has nothing to do with the rule of law. The rule of law is very clear and straightforward. Everybody has to play by the same rules. In Bosnia, that's not happening. And the Republika Srpska relies on its international lawyers to define what international law is, what is in accordance with Dayton Accords, and just because a U.S. ambassador says it's not, or because Hoyt Yi says it's not, does not make it true. The sanctions that were introduced are introduced at a time when there's an investigation by a prosecutor in Bosnia and Herzegovina whether or not there was a violation of the law. The American embassy and the State Department decided the verdict. They introduced sanctions on a case that's ongoing. It's interference in the judicial process in Bosnia. You should be objecting to that. If you have a problem with Croatia interfering and proposing a plan on constitutional change, you should have a problem with the U.S. Embassy interfering in a judicial proceeding in Bosnia before there's even a decision to indict. I mean, what is the prosecutor going to do? Stand up to the U.S. Embassy and the government after sanctions have been introduced? It's ridiculous. Now, the question, okay. I promise. Even though there's other things that were said in terms of Carl's introduction, it wasn't Dodik who lined up the soldiers, right? Who lined up the soldiers in Banja Luka? It was a member of the Bosnian presidency.
Remember you said you were going to ask a question.
Well, here's the question. Given the change here after the election, President Trump has been very clear. The U.S. will no longer go to other countries and tell them how to run their governments. He also very specifically stressed democratization programs are destabilizing. How do you see your activism in light of what is potentially a change of U.S. policy on providing funds that eventually fund your work?
Excellent question. Before that, I'm going to apologize, but just two factual things from my part. One is just a reminder that the Constitution, which is part of the Dayton Peace Accords, was signed by the government of Republika Srpska. The Constitution defines the role and the structure of the Constitutional Court. So speaking of rule of law, I think the decisions of the Constitutional Court should be respected. I think you'll agree with me. And on the Treasury decision, I really encourage you to take a look at the wording of it very closely, because it does not refer just to the issue of the referendum, but it refers to the obstruction of the Dayton Constitutional Order and peace accords over a number of years.
That's a separate process, because they didn't say what that obstruction is. So
But you said that the verdict was brought before the case was closed. So the verdict is on a previous cases.
because he didn't observe the
Okay.
decision of the Constitutional Court. That is an ongoing investigation.
Okay, our audiences online are not going to be able to hear you, so let's give a chance for Yasmin maybe to respond first, if you have any reflections on this very briefly, and then on the questions of how.
With respect to my colleague's point, I think Ivan, you've kind of made the point. I would just say I'm gonna pick on one particular construction, which I think is very telling. The notion that international judges and Bosniak judges have outvoted Serb judges and Croat judges. Either there is law or there is not, right? So as long as you insist that that is the dynamic on the Constitutional Court of Bosnia-Herzegovina, you yourself fundamentally are admitting that you do not believe in the rule of law. What you believe in is absolutely ethnically constituted law, right? So this notion that, the notion that only, Serb decisions should apply to Serbs, Bosniak decisions should apply to Bosniaks, that's what I'll say on that front. As it concerns the notion of what has happened in the United States and the broader process of activism, and the notion, for that matter, of me as an activist choosing sides, of course I choose sides, as do you, as do all of us, right? Of course I'm a partisan, right? I make certain arguments on the basis of what I think are the facts and what are certain political options and political opportunities and political eventualities that I would like to see not only Bosnia-Herzegovina, but in the entire region. I think it is a very negative and potentially disastrous decision for the new administration to take the line to democratization programs are destabilizing. If the new administration decides that that is going to be its policy moving forward, from my end personally, that means that I'm going to have to reach out to new international partners and new local partners, because I have no other options at that point. I fundamentally believe in the values of this republic and this country, and I believe that the best friend that Bosnia-Herzegovina has had is the United States, and I feel it would be a disaster for the United States to disengage from Bosnia and from the Western Balkans. But if that is the decision of the duly elected government here, of the duly elected White House here, then we will have to go to places like Berlin, as we already go to. We will have to go to new partners and new allies, those who fundamentally do believe in democracy and the rule of law and civil society and activism and the necessity of all of those things.
Why do you
Andre?
think you believe?
Andre, let me moderate the discussion, please. Andre, you had
I'm thinking, what should I say? I understand completely the question how the U.S. change of policy, if that type of a change of policy happened in this manner, as we believe, would influence many other countries. On my personal level, let me tell you, majority of funding for my organization comes from government of Serbia. Those people who heard me what I'm saying about Vučić, they would say he is paying me, but no. But what I'm saying is that I really believe that it's not question that this type of understanding where you want your country to belong to should not be connected to the money issue. My background is on the other side. My ethnic background is on the other side of the earth, but it doesn't mean I have connection to U.S. money, and that's the reason why the political activism is going on. And there have been cases when U.S., and not just U.S., many Western supporters of, let's say, Youth Initiative for Human Rights, like Norway, decided just in one day to leave us. we survived because, you know, I don't want to make big statements, but I really believe that the Trump is not having anything to do, as well as Obama didn't, or any other policymaker, with what we believe is good and important for our home countries. And additionally, I would say, from my point of view, there is no better way to understand local activism in the former Yugoslavia than to take the history, 25 years history of this activism, and to bring that experience, as many people in this room asked in the previous weeks, to the existing political situation here. And I would love to say this is my partisan opinion.
Let me start taking two questions at a time because I'm starting to see lots of hands. Meto Koloski, I think, was next. And then we can probably take the question right next to him.
Meto Koloski, United Macedonian Diaspora, and thank you so much. Unfortunately, you know, it's a very depressing situation in the Balkans, and it's fortunate that you know, the carrot stick of EU and NATO, particularly for my homeland, Macedonia, is no longer there, and it's definitely with this administration and everything that's been going on in Europe. I'd love for you to perhaps touch on, you know, in the Macedonian community, we have this saying, the four wolves around Macedonia, and unfortunately over the last 2 months this has become quite true. 2 days after elections, Edi Rama called the parties of the Albanian minority in Macedonia, and they developed a platform which the basis of the first 3 points were focused on ethnic rights and changing the laws of Macedonia, to change a flag, the anthem, and different things. And yet, you know, we thought that probably economic development or prosecuting crime and corruption is probably more important than some of these ethnic things. And then they announced this platform on Christmas Day in Macedonia, so the timing was really bad. Then you have Serbia's foreign minister claim that we've offended our Greek brothers by recognizing Macedonia as a Republic of Macedonia 1 day after New Year's, and then the Bulgarian president said that Macedonia should join the EU, but Macedonian identity should not. And just 2 days ago, the Greek prime minister in Belgrade said that Macedonia is not meeting its international obligations, yet the ICJ in 2011 ruled that Greece violated the UN agreement on the name issue. And so it's making it very difficult for us in the Macedonian American diaspora community. It's making it difficult back home when they're trying to build coalitions, governments that will bring the country forward and get NATO and EU back on the priority. And then obviously with all this rhetoric from the Trump administration lately is not helping. So if you could perhaps comment on some of these developments and all that on Macedonia.
We'll take another question right next to you, Meto.
Thank you. I'll stand up because I'm... hello, I'm Dira Cepani. I'm a representative of the Women's Network, Equality and Decision Making from Albania. I think I'm the only one Albanian in the room. So
I'm Albanian.
I'm glad that... Oh, that's great.
More ethnic Albanians than you think. Maybe Albania proper.
And yeah, thank you for this event. It's very important to discuss about the situation in the Balkans. And every time I hear a political situation in the different countries of the Balkan, I hear the story of our lives. It's the same everywhere. So regarding to the civil society support, I do completely agree with Mr. Nosov that the political support is important, but I think that civil society in the Western Balkans, in the Balkans, has shown that is the first one and one of the only ones that have shown that cooperation is possible and is important in the Balkans, and they can bring peace and good relations between each other. So I think that apart from political support, I think that civil society support is very important. In many of the countries, and I'm speaking about Albania, but I think the situation is the same in all other Balkan countries, civil society has a lot of pressure, especially when it's being critical. So I think the support from abroad is very important. It's not a matter of funding, as the speakers were saying before. It's a matter of not feeling alone in the battles that we are fighting all together. So thank you for your support, and thank you especially to the National Endowment for Democracy for being such a great support for this region in the Balkans. And my question would be, what would be your remarks regarding Albania? It's the only country that hasn't been mentioned during the description that you had about the political situations in the other countries, if you have some, or I may say some, but I would like to hear your perspectives of those. Thank you.
Let's see if the speakers can comment, and thank you for your good work, Eldira.
There is a guy there.
I think we'll stop with these two, and
I guess I'll very quickly speak to the Macedonia question. I mean, look, I think you're absolutely right. The situation in Macedonia is very, very worrisome. The pattern that you've described, you know, the quote unquote four wolves or what have you. I mean, look, I think this is a function of the unfinished democratic consolidations of the entire region, right? All of these governments, unfortunately, including in Greece and Bulgaria, which are EU members, at various times view it profitable for their domestic audiences to export a certain kind of instability or this kind of, you know, nationalist, populist, just sentiment, right? These kind of talking points. You know, every few months you just sort of throw a little stick of dynamite in there and get things going and distract your domestic audience from whatever is going on in the region at that point. I mean, I think this is why it's, you know, these are to a certain extent fairly comedic episodes, although they have very significant effects, especially on countries like Macedonia and Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, which are, you know, remain sort of perennially unstable or destabilized by these kinds of actions. But this is exactly why we cannot give up on not just sort of domestic democratization efforts, but a kind of regional democratization as well. And I think the second speaker made that good point, right? Like at the civil society level, we have tremendous linkages. We have tremendous networks, right? People from Tirana have no problem going to Sarajevo or to Belgrade to have these meetings, to talk very frankly. And you're absolutely right. We're all confronted by the same kinds of problems. These are regional phenomena. And so to my mind, you know, when I speak about Macedonia, I have to talk about Bosnia, and when I talk about Macedonia, when I talk about Bosnia, I have to talk about Macedonia and the entire region, because until we create the kinds of mechanisms and we create the kind of inertia, right, we're never going to see that wholesale consolidation. And when you create the wholesale consolidation, I think you'll see a lot less of these kinds of silly and reactionary and pointless disputes over non-issues, right? This Bulgarian idea of Macedonian identity. I mean, it's not only is it offensive, but at the end, it's also farcical, right? It's a meaningless statement, but it elicits fire and brimstone, and that's exactly the point, right?
Anything on Albania, maybe?
About Macedonia, I remember that the first signal that something is wrong in Macedonia was that ruling party or ruling parties were controlling media. That was the first country in the region that had such phenomena. And I remember that so many people say, yeah, but Macedonia is so advanced comparing to other countries in the region. It was 2007, 8, that they don't need other support. That everything will be fine. We should trust in institutions that are already built and so on. And this is the proof now what is happening in Macedonia, that what we build in all Balkan countries is very vulnerable. That progress is not for granted. I mean, that processes that will go back and much back, I mean, are possible. And I'm afraid that this will happen in Macedonia in the long run. What is very make me, almost sad, or how to explain my feeling is, I talked so many times in Brussels about Macedonia, and they absolutely, people that are involved in solving crisis in Macedonia, they don't know what to do. Absolutely, they don't know what to do. And I remember one very, very off the records, but very open and honest message. And a guy who is one of key negotiators telling me, I just hope that Americans will jump in and help. And this is kind of reality for Macedonia. And I think after the elections, we hope that elections will solve something. But unfortunately, I don't see that much things will be solved in the long run. And that is the message from Macedonia, that we need to build institutions and we need to go further, and not to stop at some level and say, okay, this is enough. for that particular country, and we should not work further, and that's good until 2020 or 25. Let's do it, let's take it easy. So I think that lesson learned from Macedonia should be applied to other Balkan countries.
Any notes?
Albania. No one spoke about Albanians again.
We should try to do something, yeah.
I'm not so familiar to all of the processes in Albania, but I believe participation in the work on the regional level, which Albania and Edi Rama and his government did, is really good. And I, just a little bit coming back to what you said before about Serbia and Croatia agreeing on Bosnia, and Bosnia is lost the game. In Kosovo, I don't believe this is the case, even though this is the joke. Because, in Kosovo we face with very specific situation where international community is having a lot of power, much more power than we should hope for in 2017 to have. And when I say that, I mean ruling the country, doing and helping still local authorities to build up the country and all of that. And then on the other side, you have big troubles and big problems in this regional cooperation efforts when Kosovo is involved because of Serbia's position, with change of Serbia position, with Kosovo position. It happened the other day, and no one actually published that Kosovo left some of the regional meetings because they were disagreeing on something, on some decision that some Serb will be put in some position as a director somewhere. So what I'm saying is...
It happened in Albania, so we can mention
it
Albania.
happened in Tirana, yeah.
There's a reason to
with the
mention
support of OSCE in Kosovo, which is an engagement from Bosnia. So it was really regional effort. But what I'm saying is that this is so important perspective of traveling, which you mentioned, and I would support that, because it looked like, in a way, crazy, but, I traveled first time to some other country, I don't count and don't remember, like when I was small, in 20s, first time in the neighborhood country, because, we don't travel. So I think we need to change that, because, for those older folks in the room, and even those from former Yugoslavia, you know what it means when you could travel, in Sarajevo or in Bosnia and meet people. The biggest trouble in Balkans is that we hate each other and we don't know each other. And that's something what we should, accept as a knowledge. So you have a bunch of prejudice facing people, and I think their civil society work was great. You have so many of those mechanisms, so many of them with support of United States of America, especially the private foundations here, which help many of those initiatives in Bosnia and Serbia, the first time in Kosovo-Serbia relations, Albania was involved. But now we are getting local governments to get on the board. That's great news. And that's something where we should support them, all of them, when they decide to put money and efforts in that type of investment, because that's investing in future voters. We should have in mind that voting is a key issue for our democracies. Yes, of course, institutions, yes, of course, all of those issues, but we still didn't learn to use and practice our democracy as we have it, and we need to work on that. When I say that, I mean, take the media on the elections. You have 30 seconds on national TV in the election time, every political party. 30 seconds. Can you decide, will you vote on this or that for 30 seconds every day? And this is like bad ruling. This is bad for everybody. Even if they're left or right or whatever, there is no serious debate and serious discussion within societies.
We have a couple more questions in the back. Let's take more questions. There was one all the way in the back, and then here we'll come back to Rob.
Thank you. My name is Gordon Duguid. I'm currently with the State Department's Bureau of South Central Europe. Until last August, I was a deputy ambassador in Belgrade. Two clarifications before my question. First, Vice President Biden was supposed to meet the opposition. His plane was held up by weather. The meetings with the opposition and civil society in Belgrade took place with Charlie Kupchan, who was his senior foreign policy advisor. So it was on the schedule, and unfortunately, weather interfered. On the sanctions on Mr. Dodik, this was not a decision by two individuals. The decision to impose sanctions is serious, took long-term debate, and was made at the deputy level in the National Security Council where it belongs. It was a government decision. And then my question is about Parliament and engaging the parties. In Serbia, there's one electoral district. 50% of the MPs live in Belgrade, they're from Belgrade, and if you go out, as I did, to many towns, you ask the mayors, who do you talk to when you have a problem? And they say, well, unless you're in the SNS, or unless you have a relative who works in the ministry, you don't talk to anybody. In the last elections, last spring, you saw a number of mayors change party to SNS in order to be able to get resources for their town. What type of parliamentary reform is necessary? How should outside people who work in the Balkans and wish for success in the Balkans help political parties and parliament develop so you don't have to worry about the 3 or 4 people who are at the top and thwarting everything? In Serbia in particular, the MPs answer to the party. There is no one who answers to the people at that level.
I'm afraid this is the case for most of the Balkans. Rob Benjamin up front here in the third row.
Thank you very much. I'm Robert Benjamin with the National Democratic Institute, happily still very much engaged in the Balkans, courtesy of the NED and USAID, and working with, among other institutions, political parties and parliaments. I think all of us are feeling a little whiplashed by the geopolitics within and outside of the region. And I am tempted to agree with those who feel that Europe and the United States have lost their grip, and that other powers, legitimate or not, are taking up the space. And when it comes to the role of Russia, I think in Washington we have to be a little bit more expansive in understanding Russian influence, where I think people here are focusing, as they should, on Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia. But I think we also have to incorporate a larger space to understand the entirety of this phenomenon. And that does definitely include the Balkans. And so I say that to my friends and colleagues here in Washington. I probably will play a little bit off some of the earlier comments. We are 25 years into what has proved to be an exhausting, elongated, never-ending, it seems, democratic transition. And with those geopolitical factors in mind, and with some of the comments that I've made, I would like to ask if it's possible at all to distill a little bit what you see to be the democratization agenda for the region at this stage. And I'm thinking about some of the structural issues that we're referencing, such as electoral systems or separation of power or sectoral reforms such as the judiciary, the hardware stuff. But I'm also thinking about the political currency and some of that software where it has to do with relationships between government and political parties and civil society. Or it has to do with the notion of how citizens themselves conceive that very identity. Do you have to play the ethnic card as the price of entry into politics? Is that common currency now? If so, I would find that quite sad because it denies other types of political affiliations that can cross over and diminish conflict that has plagued the region. What is it that we need to be focused on? Is it all of the above, or can you distill particular areas? And in that, and going to the point made, and I do have very strong and definite views of the utility of outside assistance groups, not just NDI but others, but really where's the meeting point between external support, whether it's technical assistance, whether it's solidarity, the meeting point between that and the agency and the activism and the citizenry or citizenship, now more than ever, that the countries in the region need to rely on for themselves because of so many factors that we're discussing. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. So, should we take it in order, or?
Why don't we let Goran speak first, because I think Goran hasn't spoken in a little bit. Okay.
So the first question was on the parliamentary system in Serbia and what reforms.
Can I just say for the Biden thing? But he didn't meet opposition. I said that, whatever the reason was.
Okay.
So
You
that's
had
the
your
whole
say, he
point.
had his say.
Yeah.
So let's. Okay. I think each person had his say, and I think the gentleman clarified what happened. The parliamentary system in Serbia and a single electoral district that basically motivates this the idea of accountability of elected officials to their political party leaders rather than citizens. How do you see an alternative parliamentary system in Serbia? What do you think would be the solution?
I think that system is quite weak, and the expectations from, I'd say, West, from European Union especially, are quite high when it comes to parliament. And I think that parliament is very weak. It's quite controlled by the ruling party. It doesn't matter who is ruling party, not this one. I mean, it was Democratic Party and so on. And they are transfer of political will of that ruling party. Expectations that are coming from West, but particularly from EU, is that we as a citizens can influence parliament much more, and that there is a possibility to have something. And I remember recently that when we tried to have some public hearings in the Committee for Human and Minority Rights, a public hearing to different issues, topics, I don't know, national minorities or something like that, and it was like, okay, we want to have one public hearing, 10 public hearings per year, and they say it's too much. And you're committee, you're just committee, you're not plenary session. And I think that the whole system is quite vulnerable. I think that the possibility to influence and to do anything is quite limited. And when you want to work with the government, you need to do you are working through the key player in the society, in Serbian society. At the moment, that key guy is Vučić. Before it was Tadić, and before it was some different system as such. Parliamentary system, I'm afraid it doesn't exist.
But any ideas of how to change that? How to change the way this is what the specific question was.
How to change? It's quite tricky. I mean, there were several ideas how to change parliamentary system. I mean, related to voting and what system should be imposed. But I think that all solutions have good and bad sides, and I think that we will not have any change. I think that this present system, I mean, when it comes to voting, is the only one that is applicable, unfortunately, in Serbia. So I don't see any other. Maybe there are some models. I mean, but you will always find some bad sides in those models.
Maybe Andrei, if you can take that on and also broaden it into this broader question of democratization agenda.
I think it's very important to I'm asking myself, and I completely agree with your assessment of the moving to Sinaca. It happened as well with the favorite Boris Tadić before, that people were moving from Sinaca or Serbian Radical Party even to Democratic Party. So any party in power, that's our culture. In my hometown, I think the president of municipality has 7 of them. So G17 plus, let me remember you about this, your favorite. So what I'm saying is that this is part of our political culture, that people who live outside of Belgrade, and that's a question of Belgradizacija, how you're going to call it, but there is something specific about that, especially in Balkans, because we have still this legacy of former Yugoslavia, and in many other parts of former Yugoslavia, like you have this difference between Pristina and Gnjilane, you have this difference between Sarajevo and many other places, you have this difference even in Croatia between Zagreb and Osijek. You can see that was part of long-term development of those centers. That's one thing. The second thing is, in our political culture, and I think who should be changed there are people who are presidents of these parties. Yes, you're completely right. If the MP is not okay with the president of the party, he goes out or she goes out. Or she keeps the mandate and creates some new political form of, I don't want to name how it goes after that. What I'm saying that people do not own seats in the parliament. How to change that? We need to work much more with a higher level, because I don't believe in people's participation in this change. I really don't, because we did that, we tried that. USAID spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on working on that, and they didn't succeed. So let's move to another strategy. The other strategy should be, let's work with the political parties who are on the table, with their tops, to work to change that political culture, because it's question of political culture. It's not question of capacity and capability of people to vote, to participate and do that. They're gonna find that way. Key thing is you have the whole mechanism for parliamentary questions, and then you have MPs not asking questions. Why? Who's gonna take them accountable for that? President of the parliament or citizens? But citizens cannot move them. They even cannot call them. I was watching the other days, here at the office, some people calling, in their free time, taking their phones and going around and calling like my senator or my Congress representative to argue about something. I don't know who is my MP. There is no my MP. There is a political party for which I voted, and then they eventually have representation. So I believe this is very, very, very important issue, but I believe the key thing is we don't have political will to change that, because it goes directly with the context of changing our power plate, which we have in the government. Who is making decision? And that's the feeling which we have, that only because media is control, everything is under this, I would say, connection. So we have the feeling that people don't have power. But then we come to the point that 9 activists of Youth Initiative made huge scandal. So what I'm saying is, and I'm just referring to Rob's question, I agree with you totally and completely. And I don't believe anyhow any of the foreign money should pay, and any money should pay activism. The question of activism for better state in Serbia should be question for us who are living there, not to be on our salary request, be active 5 days a week. And I don't know anybody who was engaged like that. Maybe there is someone, but I don't know any concrete example. But what I believe is very important to understand, connecting to this parliament issue, it's really bad feeling when you know that we spend money on a wrong project, and we don't have enough money. What I'm saying is we need much more and much clearer assistance, not just in a question of money and question of foreign aid and how this can be evaluated. We as well need to discuss what we did. When I say we, I believe the whole, and there was a very great contribution by Ivana in her book, actually, about donors' mistakes. I'm serious. Civil society mistakes and donors' mistakes, and I'm using my pencil. This is very important issue. Guys, you were spending a lot of money on reform and then not taking care about supporting those who are against reform. So, this is not democracy. This is question of serious evaluation and re-evaluation of the foreign aid at all. Not just the influence and the changes, but what you did. Where are the mistakes? Something what we learned from all of those evaluators who were sent from Washington and dealt with us. Serious discussion about, and Balkan is a great example, even by the year in which you did research, we saw so many really, 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 really worrying moments of investment in especially democracy actions. And we should consider that very seriously, and not leave it on the side like just mistake. It's mistake, but we need to change it. It's our mistake.
Great. Thanks for that plug-in. That was a while ago. Yasmin.
I'll speak to what is the thing that I concentrate on mostly, and it's to the last question. I do actually, I'll disagree with Andrei here. I think transparency and participation are absolutely vital. I don't think there is a clear sense of accountability at all, or participation on the part of ordinary citizens. The things that I've tried to work on, for instance, with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, is actually developing these kinds of platforms for participation, right? We have these activist fora, especially reaching out to some of these sort of more militant kids, what we started seeing in Macedonia and Bosnia in 2014, right? This tremendous sense of resentment and anger at the whole artifice of political power and culture in Bosnia in particular, but in the region as a whole, and the international community, creating the kinds of venues and platforms for them to come in, to have a day where they can call you every bad word in the book, and then they get it out of their system, and then you go, cool, so what do we do now? And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you actually want to know? Like, yeah, I don't know if we can do it, but let me hear it. Like, let me actually help you formulate policy demands, right? So that's number one. And this is also something that relates to the parliamentary question, right? I mean, I think Andrei raised the point very well. This notion that you get 30 seconds on television to make your point. I mean, why don't we have debates? Right, candidate debates actually happening on television on a level that needs to be elevated, right? I mean, why don't people in this region know who to call, right? I mean, these are what we talk about when we talk about civil society in this region is really still in the sort of like germ stage, right? Like we're still in the stage of fundamentally building a civil consciousness, or a civic consciousness, I should say, right? The idea that if you are disgusted with the way politics is being done, it is beholden on you, and it is your responsibility to activate yourself and demand change. Now, there's a lot of structural barriers to that, I grant, but this is something where I would absolutely agree with Andrea. At the end of the day, the responsibility is on people on the ground from the region to demand those kinds of changes. I think the role that the international community can play is creating platforms and creating venues and creating forums. I do not expect the United States or Germany or the United Kingdom or whoever else to change Bosnia-Herzegovina. I do hope and plead for the United States and other international actors to help us build those forums and those participatory institutions and avenues. That's where the conversation begins and kind of ends for me, right? That's the sort of the thread that runs through it.
I have to say to their credit that our colleagues from the National Democratic Institute both tried the candidate debates and continued to employ that as a method, as well as constituent offices, and if I remember correctly, in at least a couple of countries, which sound like this mechanism for contact with parliamentarians. Any other questions? Jim Hooper. Microphone is right behind you. There you go.
Thank you. Jim Hooper, Syrian Emergency Task Force. And that's Syrian Emergency Task Force, not Serbian Emergency Task Force. That
we might need
soon.
one of those.
Not Siberia, that's fine.
Yeah, no, that's coming soon, Andre. If the United States wished to prevent Republika Srpska from leaving Bosnia, what would you recommend as the most effective steps that the United States could take, realistically using the least possible effort?
Great, and let's take another one. There's a gentleman right there.
My name is Petr Urban from the Embassy of Bulgaria. I just kind of felt invited
by hearing
Bulgarian the farce policy that we have toward Republic of Macedonia, and the notion that we support the accession of Republic of Macedonia to the EU, but without its identity. So it's, of course, I cannot agree, and I think this is a kind of a blunt, direct accusation that kind of provides a too simplistic view of the open issue that we have between Bulgaria and Macedonia. I just want to say that Bulgaria is the first country that recognized the independence of Republic of Macedonia, and with its constitutional name 25 years ago, and we supported it throughout these years, including with military hardware in troubling times. Our end strategy is to see a prosperous and democratic Macedonia as part of the NATO and the EU. I would just say that what has been said about the remarks by the president is something that I cannot find or I'm not aware of. President Ivanov visited Sofia right after the elections, presidential election that we had in November, and he met both with the then president and the newly appointed one. So this is just a sign that Bulgaria takes a very pragmatic and open approach to Republic Macedonia. We hope that we'll be able to overcome the open issues. Thank you.
Any brief comments on that, if you have? I don't want the back and forth, please.
No.
Just
I
one.
mean, I respectfully, I mean, I'll take the point, as it were. I do think that I mean, it's perhaps a question better answered by the person who originally posed the question. I will just say that I think there are continuous the level of discourse and dialogue as it concerns these kind of explosive questions of core national and state identity in the region as a whole are at an unacceptable level, and they continue to be politicized for the most reactionary and really cynical and partisan ends. I think that's all that needs to be said about that as a general climate. And I do think I would, again, we go back to the civil society. I think when you go at the level of civil society discourse, we don't have these issues. These are not the conversations that are happening. We need to ask ourselves very seriously why it is that at the political level, these are the kinds of questions that are being asked. To the question about the potential for RS secession, and I really appreciate the way you phrased the question about the notion of what's the most bang for our buck, as it were. I think the most bang for our buck is name and shame very clearly, right? Notwithstanding the decision that was taken by the Treasury Department, which was long overdue. For too long, it has been the policy, not just vis-a-vis the current government and the RS, but in the political establishment in Bosnia and Herzegovina in general, that people are allowed to say all kinds of scandalous and incredibly destabilizing things. And for the international community to come out with very blasé statements, right? I think it's not sufficient to state simply that, the United States or the EU or what have you, remains committed to Bosnia and Herzegovina's Euro-Atlantic perspectives. The statement that was released vis-a-vis the sanctions was much better, because it not only identified the causes for why this decision was taken, but also that the United States was committed to the territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? That makes it very clear what we're talking about. That, I think, if it is done consistently and clearly, and I really do commend the current embassy staff and the current team in Sarajevo right now in the U.S. Embassy. I think they've done an excellent job. That if this is done consistently, we will not be in a situation where we will have to ask 5 years from now what else needs to be done. And I also, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm a little hesitant to go too much further down that road, because I don't think the secession threat in the RS is credible. I don't think there's an infrastructure for war. I don't think there's an infrastructure for the kind of conflict that would be inevitable if such moves were taken. And moreover, if and when we get to that point, the sort of regional and geopolitical dynamics that will be at play will be so much larger that it doesn't really make sense to talk about as taking steps right now. I mean, yes, I would like to see a larger EU and US military presence in Bosnia and Herzegovina, if only an extra 100 troops, just to make that statement, for instance, as what we've seen in the Baltics and Poland as of late. But again, that's expecting something that I realize is not realistic at that point, or at this point, I should say, which is why, again, I go to clear name and shame statements of what the stakes are, and that the United States unequivocally stands behind Bosnia and Herzegovina as a sovereign state in its current shape.
Do you want to answer something?
Yeah, I just want to disagree. That there
came back.
But that I don't believe that this no war infrastructure argument stands. I'm on the other side. I believe that you just need a fire, and you're going to have it in the whole region. So I don't believe that the threat is not so serious. And then I'm going to use the other argument, which is Kosovo-Serbia relations in the north of Kosovo. and the whole idea of how to say, relations between border police and the other, and the train case, and everything what happened actually in the previous, I would say, year and a half after the Brussels agreement started, with moving back by Serbian authorities from the north part, and with unclear discussion within the international community what happened with this division of Kosovo idea, and how it's possible that in the end, so fastly, there is no any more big incidents on the bridge. Wow, how it's possible? Who controlled then the bridge incidents? Wow, and let's ask the other question. So what I'm saying is, key thing is to, and I agree with you, shame and blame for all of those who want to see again blood around Balkans, whoever they are and whatever their position is. And I think that should be a clear message and clear, statement. And on a policy level, we should not be so tolerant for the small signs, because I will remind you about 1989, and 9 is when people, even maybe half of this room, were saying like, oh, this will not happen, no chance. In the end, 120,000 people died, we had genocide, we had many destroyed lives, families. This is our responsibility.
Thank you, Andrei. Last round of questions, Daniel Server, and then we'll go in the back. Daniel Server right there, right behind the pillar.
Daniel Server, I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins SAIS. It's good to see you all. Some of you I know in cyberspace. A comment, which I'll try to keep to 5 sentences.
I've been generous.
I haven't heard from you, and I admit I had to step out for a few minutes, any reflection or appreciation on what the change in the American administration means for the Balkans. So I'll offer you my view, which I'm entitled to because I'm not at NED or NDI or IRI. We have an ethnic nationalist administration now, one that is not committed to equal rights under the law. And I think you have to think very carefully about what that means once it's reflected into foreign policy, which will take months, admittedly. And before you plead too much for American hands-on, I would argue that our losing our grip is exactly what we should have been doing to some degree. It's a question of the pace at which we lost it and the ways in which we lost it. But we didn't support sovereign, independent, territorially and integral states in order for us to be able to boss them around. In the end, the responsibility has to be with the Balkans to sort this out. And I think you're going to see an American administration quite different from previous ones, which will make your lives in some ways much harder and in some ways much easier.
Thank you. One last question. I'll do it in the back.
Thank you. My name is Benjamin Kissen. I came in slightly late, so I don't know if this has already been mentioned, but my question was on Vetvendosia in Kosovo. And Yasmin already sort of touched upon engaging with more, I don't want to say militant social movements, but there's been a tense history between the U.S. Embassy in Pristina and Vetvendosia. But as the party and the movement gains steam, how should U.S. policy change in terms of engagement with that movement?
Any last question? Anybody else just dying to ask a question, because this is it, going once, going twice? Well, let's not do that because there's lunch waiting for us, and speaking. I know one person has to take a little break, and I really have to eat lunch too. So let's start with the Vetman dossier question to give Yasmin just a second to run out.
And I should answer Vetman dossier question?
Why not? Why not? You go way back with with those guys.
Yeah, I like Albin Kurti. You know, I think U.S. should engage with everybody. I don't see the point in not engaging with Vetman dossier or anybody else. But, and just to connect that to Dan's other question or statement, I see your point, yeah, but when I say engagement of Washington, I just don't think U.S. as a institution, State Department and all of those, we need help and support not just from the official Washington, D.C. And you've been, in a way, putting us on the third level of your table, not the first and the second as we were there, which is understandable having in mind what's going on. But I really believe that engagement for me, when I say and recommend engagement of U.S., it goes jointly with some clear positions. And that's the biggest trouble. Because general positions about democracy, rule of law, everything what we heard from U.S. officials, and we heard it for years, it's not enough. Good and bad guys should be named good and bad guys. No specific terminology definition unit at the embassies. And that's something what I really believe should be there. And good and bad processes. For me, it was unbelievable watching back representatives of U.S. Embassy speaking and supporting people who attack human rights defenders in public sphere, who attack freedom of media. And I can understand from the point of connections and communication and trying to control things to speak with them, but I don't believe in support. And I would remind you of some of the great American ambassadors' efforts to tell, for example, Serbian public that they are bigger Serbs than the Serbs are. So this is, from my point of view, wrong strategy. Doing marketing from that point of view of policy is not something what I believe we should see from U.S. institutions. And I have in mind, coming back to the Vetman dossier, just to conclude this whole thing, should we speak to extremists and all the others? I do believe in dialogue. And I believe, and I always speak with people who are complete opposite to me. I was actually, the other day, encouraging Anita Mitic from Youth Initiative to go on TV with the most awful journalist, and I'm using this wording, in Serbia, who is running the worst tabloid ever, to go with him on TV Pink in Belgrade and to fight with him. Because I believe this is needed. It's needed to say and state out, and that's the place where I believe our responsibility comes to an end, because Serbian nationalists are my problem, not U.S. problem. Serbian radicalization, potential war, everything what we are saying, it's not your problem unless you are not engaged in a way we believe you should be engaged. So what I'm saying is no one is not giving to U.S. responsibility for our lives. I don't give you that. But I'm just saying don't mess with us in lack of understanding or lack of engagement. And that's something what I can say to my American friends. We've seen that in previous years. Even it was not official policy, even it was weather or whatever, you know, we saw that. We saw many, I would say, bad steps in these situations and support to some people who do not deserve that support.
Anything to add, Goran, in your concluding remarks?
2 hours ago, I mentioned when you asked me why we failed, why all our investments failed, I mentioned one of the reasons is that message is not clear and strong. And that's what Andre mentioned. I mean, message must be clear and strong. I'm dealing with human rights. And, you know, when someone from abroad is coming to see any government, Serbian, Bosnian, Macedonian, and they say, you know, what about human rights? I mean, they say, well, we are respecting the highest level of human rights. What about rule of law? Yeah, we believe in the rule of law. That is not working. I mean, or democracy, or free elections. You cannot tell them, you must be specific what you expect by free elections. Andre mentioned also that it's very important. I agree fully. Free elections are crucial for all Balkan countries. And how to achieve that? With such media? No, it is not possible. If you don't have access to media, it is not possible. If opposition parties, I'm not in any political party, But it is not possible for opposition party to do anything if they don't have access to media and to funds. If funding of opposition party are not good. So this is the message we need to pass, something very clear and very strong that is from United States and also EU, must pass that message. If messages are very general, we will not achieve anything. And I think this is the thing that should be done in the coming period, especially now when they expect that those messages will not happen anymore. So the time of clear messages or strong messages are past. You know, they can play any game in the future. I think that particularly now that things are important. That you're coming with very strong messages about with whom you should talk. I mean, we should talk to everyone. I'm talking to everyone in my country and in any country. We should talk to everyone, but it depends how we are dealing with, how we are engaged with someone. How, not if. We should talk with everyone, but the key message is methodology. What you will do exactly with whom, and what you will tell everyone. And to be honest with all of you, of course, some of you may know there are a lot of prejudice by Balkan politicians. They think that they can either bribe, foreign people from abroad, or they think sometimes they have such a stereotype and prejudice that people that are coming from abroad are stupid and that they can trick and play games with them. I don't believe that, but I heard so many times that they are sharing such prejudice and stereotypes with me particularly, and the best thing to deal with that is to pass very strong and clear message.
And the last message, speaking of messages, Yasmin, maybe reflecting again on these two.
Yeah,
questions.
Definitely. I mean, to the point about this notion that there's now an ethno-nationalist in the White House. I mean, look, I'm not an American. It's not my job to tell the people of the United States what that will mean for them. I think it's very clear what it will mean. I think this country is, if not on the if it's not already there, it's certainly on the precipice of a constitutional crisis. And it's something that we have to understand also in a global context. I think it would be a millennial mistake for us to abandon the core democratic values, norms, and principles that have made the United States what it is. And however, imperfect it has turned out to be, what has taken place in former overt authoritarian areas of the world, like Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans. I am a critic. I have issues. I have problems with particular policies, with particular policy agendas. But I am absolutely committed and unwavering in my commitment to democracy as an ideal. For this region that we're discussing today, but also as a global order. I think as it concerns the question of who should we be talking to, I think we can talk and should talk with everyone, provided we're doing so in an honest and transparent manner, provided that as many people as possible are involved in those conversations, and we're always building structures for broader conversations, and also that we make it clear that there is a difference between, if you want to put it in these terms, free speech and hate speech. I don't think it's appropriate to let off gas canisters in the parliament. I also don't think it's appropriate to use all manner of reactionary and chauvinist vulgarities as a manner of everyday political speech, and to whip up sectarian resentments, and to pretend on the part of the international community that, oh, we don't see that. I think, again, I go back to the point of naming and shaming. I think we have to understand that democracy is not just free elections, it's not just free speech, it is an entire complex of values, norms,